Hello, everyone. It is 10 a.m. and I would like to thank Edwardsville Public Library and Diana for hosting us this morning and for also bringing in an IT guy to help Matt, our IT guy, because we actually had everything set up and working before 10 a.m. this morning. So it is a good day. So thank you for coming to our third Thursday continuing education program. Just a few reminders for everyone. Again, we have a lot of people who are joining through Zoom, including our two speakers. So if your camera is on and you are not a speaker, please turn it off. Also, to help us keep attendance, we do ask that you change your Zoom name to either your first and last name or your first name and library name. If you're unsure how to do that, go ahead and just put your name and library in the chat, or if that's just quicker for you. That'll just help us know who all is here with us today. Also, our speakers, I believe, will be taking questions at the end, but if you think of something or if you have any questions, go ahead and put it in the chat. And then after our third Thursday CE, whenever we dismiss that and then adjourn that and then rejoin for Members Matter, then we ask that, if you would like, you can turn your camera on, unmute yourself and join us that way. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers today. We have Nanette Donahue, Technical Services Manager for Champaign Public Library, and Amanda McKay, Executive Director of Effingham Public Library, and both are current members of the Illinois Library Association Advocacy Committee. And today they are going to present to us about the Ready, Set, Advocate toolkit, which is just in time for the upcoming legislative meetups. So thank you, Nanette and Amanda, for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for having us, Kate. So this is the Ready, Set, Advocate version that is specifically for frontline staff, although it is relevant to anybody who works in a library of any type. And we're going to go through some advocacy basics here. Normally this would be an audience participation section, but doing that via Zoom is a little difficult. So I'm going to have you think to yourself, what comes to mind when you think of library advocacy? And I'll pause for just a few seconds and let you consider what library advocacy means to you. One of the things that tends to come up the most when you ask this question is legislative advocacy, things like calling and emailing your legislators to support a library-related cause. And that's great, but that's only part of the whole advocacy pie. So let's think about who at your library does advocacy work. Whose responsibility is this? Who handles the advocacy stuff? And I will tell you that when I started on the advocacy committee 5 years ago, I thought it was really weird that they wanted me there because I thought advocacy was something that library directors and administrators did, and I am a middle manager. But that is a very common misconception about what advocacy is, who handles library advocacy. All advocacy is to actively support a cause, and libraries are our cause. Anyone who works in, is associated with, or appreciates libraries can be a library advocate. This does not require a special title. This does not require any authority or power in your building or in your institution. It just is. Anyone can be a library advocate. So much of the discussion we hear around library advocacy has this really intense focus on legislative advocacy, and that is an important piece. But the heart of advocacy is telling the library's story. And anyone who supports libraries can engage in everyday acts of advocacy in order to help build strong coalitions of library champions. These coalitions will help us face the challenges of serving our communities in today's politically fraught environment. So anyone can do advocacy work. Why are you an important advocate? First of all, you know what your community needs by connecting with people every day. You are associated with a library either as a staff member or a trustee, and you are aware, you are part of your community, you are enmeshed in your community, you know what those needs are. You know what your library can do right now, and you're already doing a lot of stuff. Celebrate what you're doing and tell people about it. Both you and your library exist within a larger community or organization. All of us are part of our library community. All of us are part of our, city community or village community, but you're also part of other organizations throughout your community. Whether you or your staff are part of the Rotary, Chamber of Commerce, a parent-teacher organization at a local school, a faith community, a social group, you already have connections to others in your community that you can use to do this sort of advocacy work. And finally, you know how your library can fit in with that larger community or organization right now. Whether it is a partnership to bring in a presenter, a story time in the park, or something else entirely that we haven't thought of, you are likely already positioning yourself to be an advocate. So this is just kind of reminding you that you are here to share the library's story. You are already probably doing advocacy work. Maybe you just don't know it. So if we're looking to tell the library story and we're looking for the best storytellers with some of the most compelling stories, those are the folks who are on the front lines at the library. You all get to see and hear so much of what goes on within the library. So if storytelling is a key component of library advocacy, you all are the advocates we need. So really quickly, ILA has developed a 3-part advocacy training program called Ready, Set, Advocate, as well as an advocacy toolkit. This presentation is based on these very excellent resources, which can be found at the ILA website. ILA.org/advocacy is where you can find that. I highly encourage you to take a look. The toolkit provides a lot of information and support for your advocacy work, and it's really well put together. So highly recommend that for you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to get us ready to advocate for libraries.
Awesome, thank you. So as Nanette said, connection. Connection is really our main thing here. So what is advocacy? So before we're ready to advocate, we need to know what exactly is advocacy. So advocacy is taking action, it's engagement, it's supporting a cause, it's defining specific issues or concerns, it's sharing a positive message, and it's leading. Advocacy is also research, education, lobbying that can influence public policy or decision-making. Basically, for all of us, it's also helping people find their voice. So it's helping them find a passion about the library and a way to be able to share that story. So we can be advocates for ourselves, we can be advocates for another group, or for people, or for systemic, legal, or policy changes. But mostly advocacy is about making those connections. It's about building coalitions and developing support within the community. It's also about telling people about the thing you're passionate about, in this case, libraries, and meeting them where they are. And it's about being ready to talk about your library. So what is advocacy not? Advocacy is not selling, it's not marketing, it's not pressuring, and it's not begging. So so marketing obviously has a place within the library landscape. Like I'm not like we're not bashing marketing or anything like that. It's just that that's not what this is. So this isn't like just like telling the like this is what's awesome about the library. That's a piece of it. And that's kind of what the marketing part does, is like build that awareness about the library. But advocacy is kind of taking that a step further. It's taking that awareness about the library and putting a really specific story on it to affect some type of change. So it's definitely not presenting an idea and letting someone else or making someone else do it. Like we're not just like dumping a problem into somebody's lap. And it's not fighting against something, and it's not protesting. And it's not only just reaching out to your legislators and elected officials once a year and asking them for your continued support and funding. And it's also not about high pressure conversations. I think that's probably one of the main misconceptions, that this has to be like really formal and like make an appointment and sit down and tell this like really big thing that I've memorized. And it's not that. It's a lot less pressure. So the 4 stages of advocacy. So there's 4 different stages, and sometimes like that can make it seem a little bit confusing because when we talk about advocacy, sometimes we're talking about like one discrete component of that and not like seeing the whole picture of it. So some of your advocates will focus on local issues, others on statewide or federal issues. And so whether it's community engagement, building an advocacy network, or getting the message out, all are part of a continuous sustained process or continuum that involves 4 stages. So we're going to work through those 4 stages now. So stage 1 is laying that groundwork. And this is where those connections really come into play. This is your community engagement. This is building those relationships. This is the thing that you're doing at the desk every day. So this is you connecting with your patrons that are already coming into the library and hearing their stories and kind of understanding, why they're connected to the library and all of that good stuff. And then, So it's being able to, you can also do this through like joining local organizations. So as Nanette mentioned, your local Rotary Club, your Elks Club, you know, the Kiwanis. There's like a ton of other service organizations too. And it doesn't have to be something that formal with dues and all of that good stuff. It can just be, you know, your local PTA. It can be at your kid's baseball game, you know, just turning to the parents that are right next to you, parents, grandparents, spectators, and building that connection with folks and saying like, oh, you work at the library, or like maybe you just came from the library and you've got your library shirt on. Like, I know this happens to all of us. We're at Walmart and here we are, we've just gotten off work. Maybe we still have our library badge on, or we've got a shirt that's branded with the library, or maybe the person just knows you from the library. And they're going to stop you and they're going to start asking questions, and kind of, you know, checking in and seeing like, how's the library doing and different things like that. That's building those connections. That's that community engagement. So stage 2 is turning that support into action. So we want to build that support network with decision makers and library users, because you never know who is going to have an impact on the library, a positive impact on the library. So we can do that by getting the message out about what the library needs, any changes or initiatives. So basically, like when you're having those conversations with people, it's kind of having something already in your mind of like, this is something that's really important that's happening at our library. Like maybe you're trying to increase awareness around a particular topic, you know, and so, you know, you just want to kind of have that in mind and have a little story that kind of goes along with that. And it's also attending advocacy training like you're doing today. That's a great way to turn your library support into an action. So stage 3 is to advocate for specific goals. And this is where being really aware of what's happening in your local community really kind of coalesces and takes center stage. So you want to pay attention to those local initiatives that are happening and just any concerns without, you know, out there in your community. What's your school board talking about? What's your city council talking about, your county board, any other elected units in your community that have influence? You know, kind of listen to what they're talking about at their board meetings, or, you know, in their, maybe you have like a community Facebook group or something like that. Like, what is coming up and what are you hearing about? You also want to pay attention to the messages from ILA and from IHLS about state funding and other types of funding issues that might be coming up, good or bad. You know, right now, things are pretty okay. You know, we have a new state librarian. Our past state librarian was fantastic as well. You know, so there was always a lot of support. And so just, you know, being able to kind of talk about that. I always like to tell people like, hey, here's a little trivia fact. The state librarian is also the Secretary of State. And hopefully that's helped someone win some trivia contest. And so just little things like that can kind of just be a little bridge. So don't hesitate to reach out to your local officials, also to ask for support. So this is kind of where that piece comes in. And then just share back with them how state funding and grants are making a positive impact in your library. So, you know, let them know, like, you know, we do receive some state funding and this is what we do with it. But most of our support as a public library comes from local property taxes or another local tax source. You know, and if you're a school library or an academic library, kind of connecting those stories as well. And finally, just kind of be aware of all the different like higher level stuff, whether it's national, state, or international too. So stage 4 is being able to respond to those opportunities and threats. So basically you want to recognize what might present a threat to your funding or how your budget might be impacted by different state or local mandates. You want to read your ILA Alert e-newsletter to remain aware of all those different legislative challenges and opportunities too, because sometimes we're asking like, please support this because this is a really great thing. Sometimes we're saying like, oh, please don't. please contact your legislators and ask them to not move this one forward. So whether the goal is local support or federal legislation, the components are basically the same. Like, you want to be able to make those personal connections to people that can influence some type of change, and be able to connect the stories of the library to how that fits into that larger picture. So why do we need library advocacy? Obviously, we want to remind the community about why libraries are vital. We want to be able to share that information with them, and so that they can become the advocates for the library as well. So if we tell the community members our story, then that, they remember kind of pieces of that. And then as they encounter opportunities to affect change, they know a little bit about us without us having to be there as well. Because we can't be everywhere all at once. We also need library advocacy because libraries meet their community's needs by quickly developing and implementing programs and services to assist community members in need, including students, seniors, parents, small business owners, basically everybody. We've got something for everyone. So this can be seen through our different offerings, all of the different services that all the different libraries offer. And so there's just so many unique ways that we can show the community, this is how we're meeting this need. As an example, during the pandemic, we, at the very start of the pandemic, our library saw a need for assisting people with filing for unemployment and getting access to government phones. And so we set up little kiosks. Our building was closed, but we set up a little kiosk at one of the food distribution points for the community. And it was a one-on-one appointment. We were 6 feet apart. We were trying to be as safe as possible because this was I think we were only 4 to 6 weeks into the pandemic. We did not know much about what was going on at that point, but we knew that there was a community need. And so we met that community need. We met people where they were. We helped them file for their unemployment benefits. And then on the other side, we helped them file fraud claims if people were filing in their name when they shouldn't be. And we've been able to take that instance of community, meeting the community where they are, and we've been able to parlay that into continued funding for our case managers. So we were able to start our human services case management program because of responding to that community. So we were able to say, we were able to go directly to funders and policymakers and say, hey, this is a thing that we're doing. We started it then, there was a need, we responded to it in this particular way. And now, we want to keep doing this. And we want your support for that. We want your support. We want you to think about that when you're on city council, when you're talking, when you're thinking about the library and how to fund it and all of those types of things. So you just kind of never know what little seed is going to turn into something larger. And being able to kind of make those connections is really, really important. So with that in mind, you want to know your library. So in order to be the most effective advocate that you can, you want to learn as much about your library as possible. So, does your library have a mission statement? Do you have a strategic plan and different goals? Hopefully those items are on your website if you have one, or they're posted somewhere within your library, or you can gain access to them. Are you subscribing to all the wonderful different ways to become aware of current events about libraries? So are you subscribed to the various listservs from IHLS? Are you subscribed to the state libraries newsletters? Are you subscribed to ILA, ALA, all of that stuff? Are you able to get that type of information? Do you know when your library's board meetings are? And do you know what's on the agenda? Are you looking at that stuff? Because that's a great way to kind of know that's what the director is talking about. That's kind of where we're going. Oh, okay, I see. This is a concern that the library board has right now. Do you know some basic statistics about your library? Do you know if your circulation is rising or falling? Do you know which month is maybe the most popular month for programs? Just little tidbits like that can go a long way towards building your story. I'm not saying that you need to like memorize every single statistic about the library. That would be a lot. And I don't think most directors do that either, because that's a lot to take in. But knowing just a few little highlights and different things that kind of work within your personal advocacy, which Nanette will talk about in the next section. You also want to think about the community as well when you're kind of building your advocacy toolkit. So who are those community leaders? So they could be elected officials, or they could be unofficial leaders. You know, who are the movers and shakers in your community? Who do you go to get stuff done, basically? Like if something happens in your community, who is the person or the group or the entity or the, you know, that makes that happen? So, and also, you know, how do you keep track of what's happening? Is it through a Facebook like insiders group? Is it through a particular newsletter? Is it through your local newspaper? Is it your radio station? Like, is it some other channel that you know kind of what's going on? What are your service organizations? Who are those people? What do they do? What is their mission? You know, Rotary has a focus on literacy, so like that's a great one to align with for the library. Kiwanis has a focus on kids. That's another great one to align with, because like there's that overlap with our mission and their mission. And so getting to know them a little bit more can help you align with where some potential advocates might be. What are the businesses? What are the big businesses in your area, you know, that you want to be able to connect with? What's your school's curriculum? Who's in charge of it? How is that developed? You know, just so that you can connect those ideas and concepts back to what the library is doing. How would you describe your community, and what issues and events are really key in your community? So, you know, maybe you have, maybe basketball is the thing. You know, like we have a town that's right next to us that just lives and dies by basketball. And that's the place to be. Like if you want to connect with the community, you go to a basketball game. Like that's where it's at. You know, and so kind of think about that within your own community. Where, like, what things does your community connect with? So as you're doing that, you also want to think about how to engage that community. What groups are you active in? You know, are you in a local craft group? Do you participate in different rec leagues? What shops do you go to? Like, you know, especially like if you shop a lot of small businesses, like they're going to get to know you and you get to know them. And like those conversations just happen so much easier. And it's a great opportunity to share about the library and to kind of make them advocates for the library as well. So to kind of wrap up part one, you know your community's needs, you know how your library can meet those needs, you have the connections within your community, and you know how the library impacts people's lives. And that's a story worth telling. And so we're going to move on to part two, which is getting set to advocate with Nanette.
All right, we're going to start off by talking a little bit about messaging. Things like how to craft an effective message, ways to maximize the impact of your storytelling, and how to create your own personal advocacy plan. That's what we're going to cover here in part two. So we're going to talk first about two different yet equally important ways of sharing the library message. Sometimes it's a little more formal. Perhaps a library is trying to galvanize supporters to take action on a particular issue, like a budget referendum to build a new library building. In those situations, there's likely to be some standard messaging around the issue, some bullet points that you can touch on to drive the message home. This is the sort of messaging that often comes from the top down. The director will say, here are our priorities, here's what we're going to discuss with regard to this. And for this sort of messaging, you want to make sure you're communicating a clear, consistent, and concise message. You want your message to be clear so your audience understands the point you're making. We hear this a lot, but avoid library jargon and buzzwords when you're sharing your message, because those things are not going to mean squat to people outside of the library world. You want to be consistent so everyone you communicate with is hearing the same message. Now, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't tailor your message to a specific audience. Absolutely, you should do that. But you want the heart of your message to be very consistent. And then finally, you need to be concise so people don't tune you out, because if you ramble on and on and on, people are going to stop listening after a little while. So informal messaging, this is what we're doing most of the time. We're sharing the library story in a much less formal way. Perhaps you're talking to a new parent who's bringing their baby to their first story time, or you're working with somebody who's getting a library card for the first time, or a middle schooler working on a research paper, a homeschooling family looking for materials to support their curriculum. All of these interactions are going to give you opportunities to talk about the library. You don't need to have a formal canned message, which could come across as really inauthentic in these situations. You just need to share what the library has to offer and what you're doing to serve and support your community. So build on their enthusiasm for what they're doing at the library by adding your enthusiasm to the mix. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my own personal issue, which is the cost of e-content. This is something I will talk about with anyone, anywhere. I manage the library's e-content. I love that people love what we have. I do not love how much I pay for this stuff. When it comes to my own personal advocacy plan, which we'll get into creating that in a little bit more detail later, one of my life goals is making sure that everyone who will listen knows how much we're paying for this stuff. This is a slide here from an annual presentation that I give to the library board. And every year there are new board members, and every single year I watch their jaws literally drop when I talk about these costs. Here are some situations where I managed to insert this information into otherwise normal and routine conversations. Recently on somebody's Facebook comments, I literally shared screenshots of the Overdrive Marketplace and how much it cost to buy the Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride because someone was complaining about how long they were on a wait list for. Well, the reason why is it costs a small fortune. When I was getting my haircut, my hairstylist mentioned she loved listening to audiobooks in the library, but was annoyed by the wait list. I said, hey, do you know how much it costs for us to buy a copy of the audio lessons in chemistry? $95 if we want to keep it forever, $47.50 for a year. Did the same thing during physical therapy. I was doing my physical therapy exercises for my back. My therapist is talking about e-audiobooks. I shared that information while pumping iron in the gym. Casually chatting about what I'm reading with the moms group I belong to. We have a book club. There's people waiting for the book club title in e-format. Why do I have to wait so long? Well, because it costs a lot. We don't have enough money to buy as many copies as we might like. This is creating awareness around an issue that is important to libraries. This is advocacy. So there are two really great motivators to get people to act on something. You can get them excited about it, or you can make them annoyed about it. The first set features some opportunities for excitement about the library and its programs and services. Obviously, this is what we want most of the time. So that storytime parent we were talking about, they are likely to share their great experience at the library with other parents. The homeschool family might enthusiastically let the other families in their homeschool pod know that the library will create book bundles tailored to a particular topic that's individualized based on a child's reading level and interests. So what we do here is we take library supporters and we use them to create more library supporters. It's like the old shampoo commercial where you tell a friend and they tell two friends and so on and so on and so on. It just spreads the library's message. And that is really wonderful and ideal. So annoyance, this is the second set. This could describe things that are like, I'm annoyed about this. Now you know enough to be annoyed about it as well. In Illinois, we have seen some legislation related to e-content pricing. It hasn't gone much of anywhere, mostly because another state's legislation got shut down in court. But when the time comes and we need to galvanize supporters to get behind this issue and try to help us do something about it, you can believe that I'll be encouraging everyone who has joined me in being annoyed about this topic to take action. And this is how we build grassroots support. So your message should combine the big picture with some specifics within your community. Some big picture messages are really common across different types of libraries and are the focus of statewide and national library public awareness campaigns. So you may have heard some of these or used them in your library. Things like libraries transform lives. I believe I have the libraries transform lives behind me on the bulletin board that my kid created when she was 4. The library means to her books, movies, and mommy. Libraries transform communities. Libraries transform lives. Libraries are essential to lifelong learning. Libraries are a smart investment and an incredible value for your tax dollar. Some other messaging that we saw during the pandemic, especially during the time when a lot of libraries were closed, were things like libraries are first responders for those needing information and assistance. And Amanda gave a fabulous example about a library as a first responder, helping the community meet their information and assistance needs. Libraries are vital to a robust recovery. And then finally, libraries are bigger than a building. And this is something that ILA used really effectively during the stay-at-home orders just as a means of sharing the creative ways that libraries were continuing to serve their communities when physical buildings were closed. So within these broad messages, if you're going to use one of them, you want to think about your local library's message. Some questions you may want to consider as you craft that message include, what's unique and special about your library? What are your local library's issues? How is the library making a difference in your community? How are you meeting those needs? Your message is also important if you're looking to achieve some specific goals of service improvement. And a lot of advocacy tends to revolve around these sorts of questions. What are your goals and plans? Are you looking to add services or hours, to expand or renovate? How will these plans make a difference in the community and in people's lives? If you're a library user, how will these plans make a difference to you? And all of these messages need to be carefully crafted, concise, and widely shared so community members and community leaders understand your library's value and goals. As all good communicators understand, it is the specific story backed by data that drives home the point. It is specific stories that dramatically illustrate what statistics only suggest. Now, I love statistics, and they're very important to use in advocacy work. They can serve as a great support for your stories. Most people have no idea how much the library is used. If your library circulates 1 million items each year, that's going to surprise people. If thousands of children attend library story hours, that's going to surprise people. In a lot of communities, the library is the most widely used public service and provides tremendous monetary value for the tax support it receives. A lot of libraries include a tax calculator on checkout receipts or on their websites to let users know how much money they're saving by using the library, and people are very impressed with this. But the combination of data and the real stories that you collect can be a really powerful advocacy tool, the most powerful. Whether you're talking with community members, community leaders, state and local officials, stories based on real people's experience provide an emotional connection that statistics alone cannot. Knowing that 2,000 children participated in the library's summer reading program, that's great. That's valuable information. But knowing that Jordan, who's a 5-year-old with reading problems, ended up becoming an avid reader over the course of the summer and is now doing just great in school, makes a really dramatic point. Kids who read succeed. Knowing that Taylor's homebound elderly mother finds her library books a lifesaver during months of isolation brings circulation statistics to life more than any chart or graph ever could. And these stories can be used in presentations to local community groups, to illustrate talking points, and to support local, state, and even federal initiatives. The story you share can have as great an impact on a senator in Washington, D.C. as it does on your next door neighbor. So with the messages you develop and the stories that you tell, you can put an advocacy plan into action. I love this quote. The best advocates for change are those people who can tell a story that moves people to action, and you are the one who knows those stories best. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to capture some of these stories. And for the most part, library staff may not be aware of the true impact of the services they provide. Whether we're working with children, students, parents, business people, the elderly, anybody, libraries have a profound impact on the lives of our community members. So here's a framework for building a library story, and then we'll give a few examples of some library stories. So if you're trying to build a really compelling library story, here are some components you may want to include. You start with a problem or a community issue. Follow up with a library intervention. How did the library help? You always want to end on a positive note. You don't want this to be a downer of a message. Include at least one fact or statistic. Try to use a story from a real person or a combination of real people. And then you can wrap up with a phrase that pays. I'm going to start with a success story from Illinois State University's Milner Library. And I love this story. I think it's spot on with the template, and it's just a great story in general. So folks at ISU noticed that students were not acquiring or were delaying purchase of textbooks and required course materials. I think all of us can totally understand why. That stuff is expensive. It was expensive when I was in college 30 some years ago, and it's expensive now. So what happened was that Milner Library developed a plan to address this issue by purchasing electronic versions of textbooks that could be used across campus. The investment gave over 2,000 students the opportunity to use these electronic textbooks. So in addition to saving money, some of the benefits that were reported by students and faculty included reduced stress, obviously reduced financial stress, but also reduced mental stress, increased accessibility of course materials, and increased ease of using materials. Milner Library is really committed to supporting students and helping them succeed with their education. This was an investment in students, and it paid off. The good news is that there are hundreds and hundreds of these stories out there, and I'm going to share one from my own library next. So years ago, we were having an issue with a lot of teens in the library after school, and we're talking middle schooler teens. We have a middle school across the street, and middle schoolers don't really have after school programs anymore in our school district that ends in 5th grade. And so we had basically packs of middle schoolers wandering the neighborhood. A lot of them would end up in the library where they didn't have really anything to do or engage with. So they were just kind of wandering in packs around the building. Middle schoolers got banned from the Dunkin' Donuts. They got banned from the CVS. They could only go in one at a time. So this was an issue that a lot of folks in the neighborhood around the middle school were really struggling with. So we developed a program called Teen Lounge. And what we did with this program, it started pretty small, and we created a space for teens to just do activities in. And it morphed over the years based on what the needs were and what the interests were. And eventually it got to the point where it was hosted every afternoon after school in our large meeting rooms. And we were getting about 80 teens per afternoon. So it was really exciting, and there was a lot of engaging activities, and we partnered with community organizations, and it was really wonderful. The pandemic hit, shut it down. But when it came back after the pandemic, we realized that it had really started to outgrow its space. So we developed a plan with an architect to renovate part of our library's basement into a programming area called the studio. It's a combination makerspace and teen lounge space. And every afternoon from 3 to 4:30, we now host over 150 middle schoolers in the library's basement where they can engage with technology, they can play games, they can socialize. It gives them a safe space to go after school, a place where their parents know they'll be okay, know they'll be supervised, but it also gives them the freedom and flexibility to feel a little more grown up. You know, they can walk over after school and they can hang out and do their own thing. And for kids this age, I have a 6th grader, for kids this age, this is vital. They're learning to grow up. And so they want that sort of space. It has been incredibly beneficial, and it has helped us build relationships with these young people that end up coming back in high school. They end up coming back in college. We end up seeing them as adults because Teen Lounge has now been going on for, I think, 15 years. So they come back and we see them again, and they talk about how much they love Teen Lounge. So it's been a really exciting journey with this. And it's really had a great impact on not only our neighborhood, but the community at large, because it gives parents and students confidence that there's a place for them to go after school. So how do you collect these library stories? Make it easy to do that. Make it a practice to have a place for patrons to write, text, or email their library experiences. And not just the negative stuff, but the compliments and the good experiences too. Next is learn how to capture stories yourself. Don't be afraid to ask people, hey, that's really interesting. Thanks for telling me that. Can I share that with others? You can also ask people to share or take photos with permission, and post some of those stories and photos on social media, again, with permission. You don't want to take somebody's story and just put it up there. This has worked extraordinarily well at our library. We often find that posting one library story brings out several other library stories in the comments. And it also provides a really feel-good moment for library staff because we don't always hear these stories. And it provides, of course, exceptional and excellent fodder for your advocacy work. Your users will really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the ways in which the library is impacting their lives. One thing we should always keep in mind is that people who love the library really love the library, and they're generally happy to share their stories. And this will give you a growing array of stories you can use to illustrate the real impact your library has on people. ILA, Rails, and IHLS all have pages where you can share library stories and see what stories other libraries have collected. ILA and the American Library Association always need stories that can show elected officials at the state and federal level how libraries are impacting people's lives. Many millions of dollars in local, state, and federal support have been secured because of the stories that you can tell. So here on this page, I've actually got a couple of stories from Effingham, from Amanda's library, about how the library visits in-home daycares. And we've got a message from a parent who's really excited about all of the things that are happening at the library that can engage her children. So now that you've collected your stories, added the statistics and data, and prepared that clear, concise, and consistent message, you need a plan for sharing it. So there's a few things you need to think about as you're developing that plan. Set the goals and key issues. Think about what you're advocating for. Let's say, as an example, One of your key issues is improving early childhood literacy in your community. Think about the audience you're advocating to. Now, remember that the gist of that message should stay the same, but you want to tailor the specifics to your audience. So you're going to present this message differently if you're talking to a daycare teacher than you would if you're talking to a service group for retirees. The daycare teacher is probably familiar with the impact of early childhood literacy on success later in life. The retirees may not be. So you're going to tailor that messaging based on who you're speaking with. Develop some talking points. So here are some talking points you could use on this issue. The library is committed to partnering with families, schools, and daycares and other organizations in our community to provide engaging early literacy activities for babies, toddlers, and preschoolers. Studies have demonstrated that early literacy prepares children for lifelong success, and we want to reach children and families where they are, not only at a story time at the library, but at community events in local parks and daycares. We want to raise a community of readers. Think about how to communicate that message. Newsletters are great. Social media is fantastic. Emails, press releases, presentations, one-on-one conversations. If you are in a small or mid-sized community and you have access to TV, that's also a good place to present your message. Here in Champaign, the TV station's across the street. So if they're having a slow news day, they sometimes wander over here and ask what's going on. And that is a good way to get messaging out there. Consider who's going to deliver the message. And remember, it doesn't always have to be the library director. It doesn't always have to be somebody high up in the organization. Involve staff at all levels in your advocacy efforts. Anyone can be an effective advocate with a little bit of training. So in a scenario like this one, you may want to consider sending somebody from your children's department to deliver the message about early childhood literacy. They're going to have a really intense knowledge of what this is about and what it's going to involve. They may be the best people to give that message. And then next, build your network. Think about who your key advocates are outside the library to help you with that messaging. So in this scenario, it might be parents groups, daycare teachers, local hospitals, school administrators. Anyone with an interest in lifelong success of the children in your community is going to be invested in this message and is going to be a good partner for advocacy. Remember that advocacy planning should be incorporated into the library's overall planning process. So if you're doing strategic planning or if you have a strategic plan, consider how you can use that as the basis for advocacy work. And also remember that plans should always be fluid. They should be examined regularly and updated as circumstances change or as you evaluate the impact of specific activities. So within the broader context of the library plan, each of us should think about our personal advocacy goals. No matter what role we play in the library, advocacy is a great opportunity to display our leadership skills while advancing the goals of the library and the community. And for the many libraries that are one-person operations, and I know that's a lot of IHLS libraries, your library's plan is your personal advocacy plan. So start by thinking about your key issues or initiatives that you'd like to share. What do you need to get the word out about? What are you trying to accomplish? What are these new goals or initiatives that you'd like to complete? Do you have exceptional after-school library programming for teens? Do you offer something unique to families with young children? Is there an initiative you're starting that just needs a boost? Consider how you can share this information with others using the story structures that we've discussed. And since this is a personal advocacy plan, think about who you may be sharing the messaging with. Is it your manager, your director, your library board, patrons, community members? What's the action you'd like them to take? Then set some goals for yourself. Is your goal to learn how to share the library message? Is it to find stories that demonstrate the library's impact on people's lives? Is it to build better relationships with community groups? Learn how to be more part of the advocacy team? And then think about how you see yourself as a more effective advocate. Finally, I have to say, just do it. Just get out there and advocate. The first steps towards being a library advocate can be the most difficult, but once you're over that initial hurdle, I am confident you will be a superstar advocate. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda for part 3, advocate.
Right. Okay. So we've thought about the stories, we've thought about who's going to connect with those stories, and now it's time to get busy. So effective advocates, no matter where you are in your library career, you can be an effective advocate. This is really a case of leading from the position that you're in, not being anointed as having some special leadership gift or leadership title. This really is meant for everybody, and it is a role for everyone, at all levels, for everyone to play a part in and to be effective at. So you want to consider how you meet the following characteristics of an effective library advocate. Where do you shine and where can you improve? Effective advocates understand their library and their community. So have you been asking the questions to your manager, to your director, to your board, whoever, to better understand the library and its goals? Do you know the mission of the library and what are those goals? Do you know what the services, what services the library is offering? How many times have you heard about a service at your library and thought to yourself, I didn't know we did that. So, kind of check those situations and see like, ooh, like, are there some holes in my knowledge? Like maybe I didn't know that we had that here at the library. Because as I'm sure you're aware, we all do like about 1,000 different things at the library. There's 1,000 different things the community would never even know that we have without us being able to tell that story. So know what's happening throughout the library. You probably know what's going on in your department, but if you are in a library that is maybe a little bit larger and has multiple departments or maybe multiple floors, we kind of struggle with this at our library too. We have 2 floors and we have service desks on both floors, and sometimes it can be a challenge to like know what's happening up on the second floor versus what's happening on the first floor or what's happening in the basement. Like, oh, like we have meetings, like meeting spaces happening. I didn't know that today. So, kind of making sure that all staff are aware of what's happening throughout the building. And are you able to effectively communicate the library's message? Is storytelling something that you feel really confident about? Or do you kind of need to practice that a little bit? And then get engaged when you are offered different advocacy training opportunities. You're here. So that's awesome. So advocacy action tips. Successful advocacy grows from building these relationships, as we've been talking about. It's great to have those stories, and it's essential to have those stories. That's a very key component. But if you don't have someone to tell those stories to, then it just kind of stays in your head. So building those connections, building those relationships, making sure you have that strong messaging and a solid plan, and as well as that community support is really kind of like the secret sauce to library advocacy. And it should be a part of all libraries. I know that sometimes it can feel a little icky, like, oh, like, I don't know, is it crossing a line when I'm talking to elected officials about this? I know that there are certain rules and all these other things. But those rules really only come into play when there's like an actual ballot initiative involved that involves the library. Other than that, you are free to talk to your local officials. You're free to share what's happening at the library. You're free to share what is passionate, that you're passionate about and that is important to the library. So you want to be able to promote the library, know about the programs and all of that stuff. You want to be social, whether it's social media or just actually being social, and I'm not saying like, join 8 groups that you're not comfortable with. And like, that's not a space that you're in. What we're saying is like, think about the places that you already are and insert the library into those places. Nanette had some great examples about like just the natural things that you do throughout your day, going to get your hair done, going shopping. Like these things, the library comes up, or there's an opportunity for you to bring the library up. You want to be able to make the library a destination, make your library attractive, powerful, and a fun place to visit. Not just the physical spaces, but the virtual spaces too. And everyone can have an impact on that. Again, I know this is a spot where you might be saying like, I'm a frontline staff member, like can't really change the carpet. And it's true, you can't, but you can do little things to kind of make your spaces more attractive to the community. You can propose different programs and things like that, just anything to kind of help communicate like that the library is a cool place to be. You also want to know your elected officials. That's definitely not just the director's job, that's an everybody job, because those elected officials probably, hopefully, if not, they should use your library. You want to be able to welcome them and, kind of be able to speak to kind of where they're at. And then get involved. Think about different professional opportunities, whether it's at the local, state, or national level. The library system has always got great opportunities to get involved. And those are just really great ways to kind of connect. So frontline advocacy. Chances are you're on the front line of your library and you're directly interacting with patrons from a variety of age groups and backgrounds. You want to feel encouraged to interact with staff from other departments and to get them to become advocates as well. I think sometimes there's like, oh, maybe this is just for like the circulation staff. They're the ones that see the patrons all the time. Well, yes, that's important too, but the programming staff have a role too. Like you see patrons, you interact with patrons. The tech services people see patrons too. Like you're each interacting with patrons in a different way, and each brings a different piece to that. So while the library director and the department heads play an important role in library advocacy, it's really the frontline workers who see the patrons every day. Like you are the ones that have these stories. You know, like whenever I need to go build a story, like I always go to the frontline staff and say, like, okay, like what are we hearing? Like tell me a fun story that's happened, tell me a thing. You know, how have patrons been using this particular thing? And they can always like come up with a story like that. Like, oh yeah, like there's this one parent, this one family that came in, or this one person came in and they needed, like it sounded like they just needed to use the printer, but really what they needed was like they needed help e-filing, like some type of civil claim and things like that. And so like, you know, like this one small interaction like morphed into this much larger thing. And they've always got great stories to tell to help connect different advocacy pieces. And then you want to build your network. You want to think about, again, kind of think about those community members. How are you going to put this into action? Who are those people that need to hear this story? It might be the library board trustees. It might be a friends group. It might be teachers, parents, school organizations, students, business leaders, all of that. Who needs to hear the message and get that message to them? So as you're spreading the word, you want to think, so like once you're confident with that message, you want to think about that you'd like to share. It's time to actually spread the word. So first, consider if your messaging is targeted to that specific group, or if it's a more general message that can be shared widely. And then you want to think about the best channel to reach that particular audience. So it might be in-person conversations, it might be social media, it might be personal interactions at the service desk. And it's very likely that it's going to involve all three of them, like all those different channels. Like, you know, Nanette's example about the e-resources and the cost of that. Like she gave you lots of different examples of the different channels that she's used that. So she's used one-on-one conversations, and she's also spoken to the board, you know, and other wider audiences too, to try to get that message across. And you want to build those relationships with those elected officials. It's important to know who your library board and all of your local elected officials are. But it's also really important to work with your library director to organize specific outreach to those elected officials so that you can share the library story. If you're a city library, you want to know who your city council members are. These folks are literally the key decision makers when it comes to your library's future. They're the ones who appoint your board members. Our board members, we're a city library, our board members are not elected. And so, you know, having that direct connection with the city is really, really important. And then finally, you want to get involved. So you can give a presentation about advocacy to library staff. There are great resources on the ILA's website. You can give a presentation to a local organization to share information about the library and how it benefits their community. Those service organizations that we mentioned, they all have like speakers that come in at their regular meetings. So try to get on their list and say like, hey, we'd love to talk about the library. You know, we've got a great project coming up that, you know, we think your members might want to hear about. And it's just a great way to kind of further spread the word about the library and different, you know, opportunities that that individuals might have to put their advocacy plan into action. So you want to join a committee or forum of the Illinois Library Association. The advocacy committee is always looking for new members as well. And so this is where we one of the goals that we have is to, you know, consider different ways that we can help advocate for libraries on a statewide level. Like what different campaigns can we do? What education opportunities can we have? One really great opportunity that's coming up is our legislative meetups. We've switched up the dates on those. So those are going to start right after Thanksgiving. I think all of the ones in the IHLS territories, well, I know 2 of them are on November 28th. I know the Metro East and the Southern one are on November 28th. That's a Monday, so that's tricky. So yeah, so definitely that. And I can't remember when the central one is. And I know we have some libraries that that would be in the central one, but I believe it's that same week. So so definitely get signed up. Sarah is sharing the link to do that. So thank you so much. And that's a great way to kind of put this into action. For your next steps, visit the ILA's Ready, Set, Advocate webpage for additional resources. Get your personal advocacy plan together. Really sit down and think about like, okay, what am I passionate about? The thing that the library does or the thing that the library needs, and how can I communicate that most effectively? You want to spread the word about advocacy to your coworkers, collect those library success stories, build that network, and get to know your elected officials, which sounds like a really daunting to-do list, but you really can just kind of tap into what you've already got and build from there, because I guarantee that you already have a network, you already have library success stories. It's all just about kind of putting that together. So the best advocates for change are the people who can tell a story that moves people to action, and you are the one that knows those stories the best. You are the storytellers that we need to tell the library's story. So, questions?
Thank you, Amanda. And Nanette will give people online a little bit of time to put in any questions they might have. If anybody in the room has any questions, feel free to talk. The owl will capture it.
Early on, you mentioned the difference between marketing and advocacy. Do you have recommendations on how to kind of divide the two messages when we have the couple main like social media channels if we're trying to like drive community action and advocacy versus telling, hey, we have a story time on Friday, come out?
I don't know that you really have to divide it. It's just that if you have a call to action, whether it's attend our program or, you know, communicate this message to, you know, someone, you know, like kind of be aware of this, it's just kind of being clear and not being muddy in that. Like, don't, you know, don't make your post try to do like a whole bunch of stuff, basically. Like, you know, if you are trying to promote story time, like stick to that. You know, market the story time, and then maybe in a later post say like as like kind of a follow-up to the story time, like, wow, we had, you know, we had 30 kids today, we're so excited that you all joined us for story time. These types, you know, like, and then tie it back to like a story about like how that story time had an impact on a child. You know, like we saw, you know, there was a child, you know, of course, getting permission and all of that stuff. Like there was a child that, you know, was kind of reluctant, but they really started engaging, like when we brought out the sticky, sticky bubblegum song or whatever, you know, just something like that. So that way, like the two messages are separate. You're promoting the event in one channel or at one moment. And then separately, kind of as a wrap up, you're saying like, here's an advocacy piece. Like, you know, this is a thing that the Storytime does.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Nanette. I don't know that we have any other questions now. If anybody thinks of anything, they should reach out to the ILA Advocacy Committee, or if they haven't, okay, that's the nod. So if you have any questions beyond this, please reach out to the ILA Advocacy Committee. Their information is found on the ILA page. Excellent, and you both are welcome to stay for the Members Matter as well, if you can. And so, well, it's 10:58, so we're gonna go ahead and wrap up the third Thursday CE. Take just a couple minutes to regroup and get started with our Members Matter.